So now that I've got my list of median household incomes and I've got them according to zip code area, it's time for me to analyze it and figure out exactly how spread out the income actually is. And just a reminder of what exactly median income means. So for example, the first zip code I have here, because I've got them, is 40023. The median household income is $115,819. That means that if you were to take every single household, okay, so every household in that zip code and line them up from least to greatest, 115,000 would be the one that's right in the middle. Well, dang, that's pretty good, right? Like even just the middle of the road person in that zip code makes $115,000. Well, then compare that to the one that's right underneath it. You've got in this zip code just the middle of the road. If you were to take those incomes and line them up from least to greatest, this one would only be 22,000. Well, man, that seems pretty spread, right? Like that seems like a really big difference. Does this difference hold true across all of Louisville? Well, it's kind of hard to tell just looking at the numbers. It's going to make more sense for us to put these numbers into some kind of a graphical representation, and that makes it a lot easier to see patterns. So that is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to use a box plot in order to analyze how spread this data is. So there are two types of data displays that we're going to use, or that I'm going to provide directions for how to use, that are really good for helping you figure out how spread out your data are. So one example is a histogram, and it basically amounts to a bar chart or bar graph that helps you to see how spread out the numbers are. And I've provided you directions for how to create a bar chart right here in this section right underneath where you found this video. So there are directions that are very step-by-step that show you how to take the data from your Excel spreadsheet and how to turn it into a histogram. It's very simple, just takes a couple of clicks, but of course I will help you if you run into problems with that. The one that I chose to use is right here, and it's called a box and whisker plot. And I'm going to walk you through the steps that I took in order to create that box plot, because it's a little bit more complicated in Excel. Actually, it's pretty darn hard in Excel, but there's a really cool website that constructs it for you, and I put that website as one of the attachments where the assignment is, where it says Boxplot, and this will take your data and turn it into a box plot for you. And right now I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first thing I needed to do was make a copy of all of those median household incomes. So I clicked on the top cell, I hit shift all the way down to the bottom. Don't worry about what those other numbers are right now. I'll explain those later. And I hit Control C, and then I went to the Boxplot website, just typed right there in the box, and I hit Control V, and it just pasted a copy of all of those numbers into the box. And then all I had to do was click the Submit Data button, and it turned it into a box plot for me. You'll notice that the box plot I just showed you a second ago, kind of the numbers are arranged going left to right, whereas this website arranges the numbers going up and down, but that's okay. You see box plots made both ways. And then I took a screenshot of my box plot. If you don't know how to do that, I'll be happy to help you figure that out on your particular device. And I pasted my screenshot into a blank Google document. If you need help with that also, by all means, I will certainly help you. I know I need to kind of adjust this a little bit to get the picture to fit all the way on the page here so I can get a view. And so what this box plot does is it shows me how spread out all the numbers in my data set are. So let's talk about what this box plot actually means. So the first thing that it does is it shows on this number line that runs along the side, it shows the highest value for the median income, and it goes all the way down to the smallest value income that's represented. So you can see that the smallest median income was $19,628, and the edge of this box plot runs to just underneath $20,000. So this represents the smallest value for our median income. And then if you look at the top, you'll see that the household median income that was the most was a little bit more than $150,000. And so the little dot here represents that highest amount. I'm going to talk to you in a second about why this little dot, this one value, is kind of out by itself and not there with the rest in just 1 second. But so it shows you where the largest value, in stats we call this the maximum value, and then the lowest value down here at the bottom is the minimum value. And so maybe this is kind of equal, right? Like it does look, I mean, this is a pretty big difference, you know, that like the neighborhood or the zip code that has the most is all the way up here at 150 versus the lowest income is all the way down here at 19,000. So right there, that seems kind of unequal if you think about it, at least in my book, that seems a little bit unequal. Let's talk about a little bit more in detail about what the pieces of this box plot represent. So there are 36 different zip codes that are represented here in this data set. And what this section of the box represents right here is the median of those incomes. So, but the middle value, like just the average middle of the road income for all of the zip codes in Louisville. And so you'll recall from the video that you looked at recently that median is the middle value. So you take all the numbers, you line them up from least to greatest or greatest to least, like we have in this case, and you find what's the spot right in the middle, what's the middle value of those numbers. And so because there are 36 values here, that means you would have 18 in the top half, 18 in the bottom half. And remember that the median is that middle value. So because you have 18 on each side, because it's an even number, you don't have just one number in the middle. So what we do in math, when we don't have just one number in the middle, we take the two numbers that are in the middle and we add them together and divide by 2 to find out what's that number that's in the middle of those two. So when I added those two middle numbers together and then divided by 2, I got $53,307. So if you took all the median incomes of all of the individual zip codes in Louisville, put them in order from least to greatest, the one that's in the middle of the road is $53,307. So that is what that line in the middle of the box represents. So these two sections of the box represent the lowest half of the incomes if you line them up least to greatest. And then the right side of the box here, so this half, I'll explain what the different sections mean in a minute, represents the highest half. So just right now, if you're looking at the highest numbers, the highest half of the incomes versus the lower half of the incomes, I'm already kind of noticing that things really kind of look unequal because the upper half, there's a lot of people that make more money than, the other half. Like there's a pretty big difference between the amount of money that the most well-off half of the city make, or of the county, of Jefferson County make, than the lower half. And you can tell that because that blue side, even though it represents half of the zip codes, it's a lot more spread out. Like, in other words, these people are making quite a bit more money because the spread is going more in that direction. So that's the part I really want to make sure that you understand. The blue section and the yellow section of this graph actually represents the same number of zip codes. It's the same number of areas of town. It's just that the blue section is more spread out. Like the people on this side make more money. It's more spread up towards the higher end, but we're talking about the same number of people. So that means that half the city is in way better shape than the other half of the city because their income is more spread in that, positive, that higher number direction. So now let's break it down a little bit more by looking at that upper half of the data. So we know that there's 18 numbers up here in this data set. And so what this section of the box represents is the median of that upper half of the numbers. In statistics, we call that the upper quartile, or we call it the Q3 for short. So in other words, that section, this little part represents what the middle of the upper half of the numbers represents. Since we have 18 numbers, we know that to split that in half, it would be 9 and 9. And because it's 9 on either side, once again, we don't have just one number that's there in the middle. So to find that middle number, we would take those two middle numbers, add them together, and divide by 2, just like we did to find the median. And so when I did that, I got 75,466. So just the middle of the road person who, in the upper half of the incomes, is $75,466. So let's take a look at the bottom half of those numbers. And it's going to be the same idea that we're going to split it. It'll be 9 and 9. And when you're finding the middle value of the lower half of the numbers, so at this section of the box right here, that's the lower quartile, and we call it Q1 for short. So because I, once again, have two numbers in the middle, I would need to add those two numbers together and divide by 2. So when I added those two and then divided by 2, I got 38,373. So look at what's happening here. Basically, the middle of the road person for the upper half of the incomes in Louisville makes almost twice as much as the middle of the road person in the lower half of the numbers. And then if you look at the minimum and the maximum amount, first of all, the maximum, and the reason that this person is out here to the side is because they're what we call an outlier. That means that it's a value that's so high that it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the data. But technically, this would be our maximum. So we've got a zip code where just the average run-of-the-mill family makes $150,000 in the same city where another zip code has your average run-of-the-mill family that only makes $19,628 if you're looking at that minimum and that maximum. So to me, this definitely indicates that There's some real inequity in Louisville, at least when it comes to income. And as you saw in the article that I read, that can lead to a lot of issues when there are so many people, when there are people that are making so much more than other people. I feel like this is definitely an issue that I want to investigate further to see what we can do to bring the lower half of our families to be a little bit more in line and equal with the other folks in our Louisville community.